Every Friday, and I'm the author of a new book called Remote Collaboration, Virtual Conferencing, and the Future of Work. So I'm here today to talk to you about the book. Before I get started, let me just say how maddeningly difficult it is to speak in this way through Zoom, right? Do you look at your screen? Do you look up at your camera? I think my students, I'm an adjunct faculty member at Chapman University where I teach 2 courses about AR and VR. The courses went virtual at the beginning of March, and so I've been teaching this way, but it's live, and when you stumble, the kids, you don't lose live speakers. But Zoom is particularly difficult for a conference because you're sitting in front of the biggest distraction machine in the world. So that's one of my complaints about Zoom, and that's why by the end of the semester, I wanted my students to keep their cameras on, because when your camera is off, you go down a rabbit hole of distractibility, is what I call it. AWE and VR ARA Global Summit are right next to each other this year. Usually they're separated by 3 months. I find that very odd because it's many of the same speakers and a lot of the same topics, slightly different audience, which is good. I realize VR ARA is a membership organization and you're representing chapters from all over the world, but they were generous to open this up to everybody and make it more democratic, and I like the feel of that, the People's Conference. So I'm going to give you guys a taste. You're getting a taste of what it's like to take my course, VR AR 304 or 340 at Chapman U. And it's a survey course. We talk about, we study VR, we do a lot of VR experiences, we talk to artists, and we get an overview of the industry. So it's really the content of my first 2 books, Metaverse and Convergence, which came out last year. But when we were banished, we decided to do a 12-week sprint to see what are the alternatives to make Zoom better or to do it in VR, right? Because we had these VR headsets that we were allowed to take home from campus. So let me screen share. Screen sharing is one of the killer apps of Zoom, right? Why is Zoom so popular? Well, screen sharing has a lot to do with it, and it is the savior of a college professor. So let me bring up my, there we go. There's my presentation. It is so much easier to do this live. I can't tell you, I see you, I'd make eye contact with you. If this doesn't work, I'm gonna ask my wife to stand behind the camera. So at least I have somebody to look at and I'm not looking at the screen. So, but now we're screen sharing, so you can't tell where I'm looking. Yay! So, oh, I'm showing you the book. That's what I was gonna do next. So that's the actual book. Here's the actual slideshow. There's the first slide. You'd think as a professional speaker, I might have some of this down. So there's the cover of the book. Professor Mark Billinghurst once again wrote a terrific historical chapter about the development of conference calls and video calls. And Joel Kotkin, who is one of my colleagues here at Chapman, wrote the final chapter, which is a contextual chapter about what's happening to work during the pandemic and what is likely to follow in the new normal. Big shout out to Blake Harris. If you haven't read his terrific book about the founding of Oculus, The History of the Future, I recommend it highly. So when I was at AWE last week, I did my talk from Spaces, which is a VR site that allows you to essentially broadcast your avatar into a Zoom conference. And it was fantastic. I'm not going to do that today for a couple of reasons. One is I want to do things that are native to the platform. And, you know, this is very much native to the platform. But I also want to show you a short clip of me as an avatar, so you get an idea of what I did at AWE.
Instead, we have to invent new forms. We have to find new ways of being together when we have to be apart. There is good news in this medium. So much good news. I spoke a little at the beginning about people knowing what AR and VR are for. But look, here, let me show you this. I don't know how well you can see this, but it's a little bit of magic that they built in this experience, right? You just throw it and it comes right back. Neat. You know, it's to show you all the magic we can do in these spaces that we can't do in the real. Let's not try and remake the real. Let's try and make new places. And some people are doing that.
All right. So golf claps for me. Fortunately, I just have to show you the good parts of the speech, and I can leave out the stupid parts and the stumbling. Great avatar from Lumi AI, and congrats on Spaces. Spaces pivoted from location-based virtual reality, and they made this great app to make conferencing on Zoom much more fun and much more accessible, and to command your attention better and to keep you out of that black hole of distractibility. So the story of this book starts at Chapman University, where we were, I think it was March 5th, banished to Zoom from our physical campus. And again, you know, it's difficult to connect with people when you're on Zoom. Fortunately, we knew each other for 5 weeks before this happened. So there was some rapport that was developed. I kind of knew who was who, and it was a great mix. Sometimes you just have great chemistry with a class. And what we did in the class, oh yeah, so this was us all of a sudden, right? And there is the crew, and together with these young people, we looked at over 120 sites that offered tools to do remote collaboration and conduct virtual conferences. So thank you to my class. And we would run over our spreadsheet every week, and we try and find great places to do that online. This is us in Spatial. There's nothing better than going to one of these sites with half a dozen, or in our case, 9 college students, and you get into the space and they touch every button they can. And we do a lot of discovery that way, but we're bouncing back to Zoom. You got to bounce back to Zoom. So what we're going to see in the future, I think, are hybrid platforms. And I wouldn't be surprised if there's some web-based solution like Mozilla that doesn't soon get integrated into Zoom. So you have one-click invitations into virtual worlds from your desktop or even from your mobile phone. So how did we figure out what sites to include in the book, right? Started out looking, I told you, at 120, and we ended up with, I think, 83 sites in the book, right? So the heart of the book is the 83 profiles we did on these companies. And our question was, how are we going to work together? How are we going to be together? The great thing about the pandemic, right, is that suddenly it presented everyone with a killer use case for VR, which we really were not sure about and had a difficult time explaining what presence was and what the meaning of presence was. So one of the things we were looking for is sites that gave us presence and agency, the ability to do things in those sites. So we broke them down into categories. Categories are difficult because you do have tools like Zoom and Google Meet where you can do all sorts of different things, right? They're good for teaching, they're good for collaboration, they're good for virtual cocktail parties. So do you put them in social? Do you put them with virtual conferences? So these are artificial constructs. I wouldn't get too hung up on them. Most of these sites are trying to do multiple things. I will say, I think that advantages sites that are for a particular vertical, like for chemistry or for data visualization, or for architecture and design, they're advantaged because they're making a switchblade as opposed to many of the general use sites like Spatial, which is trying to be a switchblade and adapt itself to all different kinds of conferences. So what we're really after when we do a Zoom call with your class or with your colleagues, and whatever medium you're working in, your technology should be transparent, right? It's technology that meets people where they are that is usually the most successful. And Zoom is a bit of an anomaly because we're being forced into using it. and you don't get a lot of engagement on Zoom because there isn't a lot of agency. By screen sharing, I am exhibiting most of the agency that we have using Zoom. Although anything I can bring up on my laptop and share, and as I said, sharing is the, in my opinion, most valuable part of Zoom. In fact, you can even, did you know you can control somebody else's desktop through Zoom? That's crazy. I thought you had to have a special app. So getting back to engagement, I think you need a combination of agency and presence, right? You need to be somewhere and know where you are, know what you're supposed to do there and how you can do it. And you need to lean into the experience and not be sucked in to the black hole of distraction, which is probably sucking you in right now. So we're talking about video conference calls, tremendous flexibility in terms of who it can serve, and the price of it is quite low, right? I mean, it's free if you're only doing a 40-minute call. They have 300 million users. That is crazy. That would be almost all the people in the United States. And Google and their competitors are doing well. You know, they've signed up 50 million, 100 million people. The remote collaboration sites are, to me, some of the most exciting and some of the most challenging things to pull off. First of all, you have to operate across multiple platforms, including mobile and including mixed reality headsets like the HoloLens. And at the same time, you have to provide a very large suite of tools, and the most important of which is screen sharing and a browser. Right, that you need all these other things that I put up there, and that's still scratching the surface. And no one has this, right? This is an ideal. If we had to make a checklist over who is really doing this right, everybody gets a incomplete as a grade. Remote training and education, this is interesting, right? Because all the world's kids are suddenly doing remote education, and it had previously been something that was, I don't know if you guys can hear my dog going nuts downstairs. Such are the exciting and serendipitous things that happen to you when you're trying to give a lecture to hundreds of people online. And thank you again for having me and for listening. It's funny, a pandemic will accelerate things. A crisis accelerates things. Things that were about to fail, like retail, they go and fail. Movie theaters, they go and fail. It's their time. They've been disrupted, they've been shrinking, and now they've just been kicked off the cliff. And I don't think they're ever coming back. Some other things will come back. Will Las Vegas come back? Probably when there is a vaccine. I mean, Las Vegas is an international destination. You know, I don't know the statistics for the Consumer Electronics Show, which attracts 200,000 people, but you're talking about tens of thousands of them coming in from Asia and Europe and South America, Africa, all over the world, right? That is the meeting of the tech world. So it's hard to believe that that's going to happen again before there's a vaccine. And, you know, maybe next year there will be one. So we have to be optimistic and move past a little bit what's happening in the real. Online education and telemedicine were two things where there was plenty of technology for them, and they were being used in very specific use cases, but by and large, they were not mainstream, right? Remote education for people the great thing about it is people in other continents can study with Harvard professors at no charge. I mean, can't get a degree that way, but you can get that education if you want it. So that's, you know, changing the world, even though the completion rate is very low because it's very hard to be a Zoom student. Something else that I learned as a teacher, which is excellent students will be excellent anywhere. They'd be excellent without college. It's the other people who are intelligent and ambitious, but they need mentorship. They need presence. They need confidence. And that's a big part of my job. It's not, yeah, it's fun to work with high achieving students, but I want to work with smart young kids eager to learn and leaning in, which is fortunately the kind of kids I got. And that's why they agreed to work with me on this book. Webinars and live streaming. Now, I like this a little bit, particularly live streaming, although you see this used in webinars too, that there is a live aspect to it and benefits to being live. It forces you to lean in. The live streamer can see the comments in real time while they're playing the video game, which is commanding the main part of the screen. So I find that an exciting way to give a talk, but it takes a particular skill. I'm not sure I could do it right now because I'm not that practiced at giving this talk. Right, the book just came out last week. And by the way, not to go too far into sales mode, it is now available at xrdirectory.org. Hybrid forms, well, that's where we're headed. Hopping from Zoom to the Oculus Quest back and forth every Monday for several hours. Shows how you're kind of hopping, medium hopping, as we do now, from our mobile device to our laptops to XR devices. And we're in this moment of tremendous fragmentation, right? That's why there are 120 companies that we're looking at. The very, very fragmented market that will slowly be consolidated by the Zooms and the Microsofts of the world. But I think we're gonna see better uses of XR and better native uses of screen sharing as we saw from Spaces. Now, I think we're also gonna see something unexpected. Something where, sorry, I don't want to get too far ahead of myself because I've got my Fortnite slide here. Fortnite, wow. 47 million people had an experience inside of a world constructed for rapper Travis Scott. And he's a giant, and you're in this instance where you're co-present with 100 people. This is 2D, right? You're looking at a small screen, a mobile, a game console. I mean, this is a great example of cross-platform. And you have a reasonable amount of agency to move, if you will, through this environment that was created for Travis Scott's music. And it wasn't really directed per se, it was a world. So I think this is a clue that world building is a new kind of storytelling that used to exist in role-playing games and the imaginations of certain types of consumers and game players. So let me go back. Oh, you know, the other thing, wow, worth talking about. Hey, get out of here. Well, now I'm at the beginning. Oh, that is so embarrassing. Bear with my incompetence. I'm revealing an old guy thing. So I'm having fun giving this, but I'm a little out of order. So we have to invent native forms, and I was going to use Reggie Watts' work in AltSpace as an example. He did some stuff in 2017. Then the company went through some instability, was acquired by Microsoft, and they're back, and they're very relevant, right? Because in spite of the kind of blocky avatars, which they use to maintain enough computing power to have larger rooms, but they also create instances, right? So in Fortnite, there are 100 people in the simulation, but there's 50,000 100 people rooms. So that's how they handled their massive simultaneity. And AltSpace has a technology they call front row that does the same thing in instances of 50. So you have Reggie Watts, who is a rapper, kind of musician, and spoken word artist, I guess you would say. Hard to describe his act, which makes it actually kind of good for VR, because until presence gained value in currency, it was difficult to explain why people would want to be in VR. Of course, to be virtually present, because we can't be present in the real. Reggie realizes that you can't stand on a stage and perform, so he gets off this stage very quickly and starts moving around the room, and he's very close to you. So he's playing with depth, he's playing with scale, he's playing with teleporting around, and he's forcing you into using your controls to be part of the show. And they have all these wonderful emoticons that they're always calling for. So it's a very, very interesting, unique experience. I recommend it. I think they still have shows. So speaking of the book, let's just take a quick look through it. There's the cover. So this is a preview draft that we make so we can go through it page by page and make corrections. Sometimes you just can't see online, but there's our sponsor, Enreal. Those guys are awesome. I can't wait for those to come out. Oh, by our pupils we are taught. That is quite apt. You always learn something when you're teaching. Acknowledgements, thank you, Chapman University. And our sponsors, table of contents. So you can see the heart is the company directory. I have a story called Tools for Today and Tomorrow. That's a chapter I just put on Forbes for free. So that's sort of the heart of the book, if you will. It's followed by the Future of Work by Joel Kotkin, who really puts it in a context that is very compelling. Here's the foreword by Blake Harris. I mentioned he wrote that great book about Oculus. And then the introduction, which lays out our method, as I did, and Professor Billinghurst's story on the birth of the video call. We certainly live in the age of the video call. And so here's the company directory, right? Here's who made it. It's not editorial and it's not promotional, it's informational. You couldn't do an undertaking like this without sponsors to help pay for the design and all the people behind the scenes that help edit a real book, and a beautiful book that is wonderfully designed and is full of humor and whimsy and I think optimism, which is a strange thing to have at this moment in time, but things get accelerated, you know, including political things, but also technology things. You know, XR is going to be developed because necessity is the mother of invention, and we have more necessity today than we've ever had. So please buy my book. I'm also doing a world hopping tour to 6 virtual collaboration sites tomorrow at 9 in the morning, and then on Thursday at 3 in the afternoon. And 20 people together go through 6 sites. We talk about it afterwards. It takes about 2 hours to go through all the sites. And then we adjourn again to Zoom, being our home base. And, you know, we just talk about it and whatever. And people ask me questions. And I don't know, some great people have done it. And send me a direct message on Twitter at Charlie Fink, or via LinkedIn. I'm also /Charlie Fink on LinkedIn, and we'll get you on the email list, and you can learn all about it. So that's the end of the presentation. Let me stop sharing so you can get my ugly mug back. I only have a few minutes left. Thank you for listening if you're still with me. Got to remember to look at the green light. You know, professional speakers have huge setups with long lens cameras and lights around them, which a lot of the YouTubers do. And I don't have that because I'm a schlumpy guy. And I do have, you know, VR stuff all over. So the journey has been crazy, right? To do a book in 12 weeks. I have so much information and I want to get it all out to you at the same time. I'm going to leave some time for questions. I don't know how questions are exactly going to work in this medium, but I'm happy to talk about VR and AR at any time, and I do so every week in my column, which I try and make as fun to read as I am to watch in person. Thank you for having me, and I'll look forward to taking your questions. And here I'm looking down at my screen. You're getting the experience of my class, looking at my screen,